Hi there. Hi, folks. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.
Let's hear good news this week.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so Meis Echad. Hi, Errol. Good morning. Meis Echad me Hashutvin im Badla Hashutvis Overis Liorshim. Let's learn another shaila. Last week we learned about the dissolution of a partnership, and what we were talking about. Whether you need a based-in, depending upon the type of assets that are being divided up, if it needs professional valuators and things like that. Today we're talking about what happens if one of the partners passes away, and how does that constitute an automatic dissolution of the partnership? So the shaila is, im echad me hashut v'meis, if one of the partners dies, ha'im hayorshim nichnesu lihiot shutfim tachtav, do the heirs of the deceased partner automatically become partners now in the business? O dilma badla hashutvis v'tzrichem lihitchalek b'shutvis o be'esek. Or maybe no, maybe the partnership has, upon the death of the partner, the partnership is automatically dissolved, and therefore, basically, the surviving partner can basically tell the heirs, "Here's your half of the business, but you're not my partners anymore. We're just dividing everything up. We're just dividing the assets." How does that work in secular law?
I think subject to the partnership agreement, the death of the partner terminates that partnership, and the estate goes just generally to the Yorshim. It doesn't go to the partnership unless you agree.
Okay, so imechad me hashut v'meis badla hashut v'soesik. That's actually the halacha. Once a partner dies, so then the partnership ceases to exist. The afalpi shehisnu lizman kavua, and that's true, even if they had arranged as partners that were going to be partners for a year, let's say, or for 10 years, and the guy passes away in the middle of that time period. And therefore, you essentially dissolve the assets of the company also. However, if the business kept running, okay, and the surviving partner continues to make a profit, he has to share that profit with the heirs of the decedent. In other words, he can't say, well, once he died, the partnership was over. So even though we were in the middle of a deal, or I started a new deal, you kids are not entitled to any of it. No, if he continues under the corporate entity to continue dealing, then he has to divide it with the heirs. So the question is, and by the way, the same thing will be true if, let's say, he engages in a speculative deal and it goes belly up, the heirs lose out. So the question is why? So it seems there must be some kind of machlokas here as to whether the partnership is automatically dissolved. So he quotes the Rambam by saying, "Echad min hashutvim o hamitaskim shemeit, batla hashutvus o ha'esek, afal pi shehitnu luzman kavua, shekvar yatsa hamaman l'rishus hayorshim v'chazeh haru hagonim." The Rambam says essentially the same thing, that upon death, the partnership is dissolved. And so what is the source in the Gemara? The Gemara in Bava Metzia brings the following case. Rav Huna, Rav Yosef, Havalei Hahu Shitla, Shachi v'Shafik Chamisha Chas Nevasa, Amar Ad Ha'id Machad Hashta Chamisha. That what is the story? Mesurpal Rav Yosef Shailo Shatlan Lishtol Eitzim, that he was in partnership with an arborist who was in charge of planting trees. V'hayakaris etzlo, and the guy was like a sharecropper. Umeis v'hiniach chamisha chasanim, and the arborist passed away, and he left over 5 sons-in-law. Amar Rav Yosef, ad achshav hayili esek im adam echad, achshav yesh chamisha. So Rav Yosef said, up until now, I had 1 partner. Now I have 5 partners. Ad achshav lo hayu somchim zeh al zeh v'lo hayu mafsidim li shachrayis hayisa al hachotein. Achshav chamisha im yismechu zeh al zeh v'yafsidu li. And Rav Yosef further said, this is not good. To have 5 partners is much worse than having 1 partner. Because when you have 5 partners, each one is relying on the other to get the job done. And too many cooks in the kitchen ends up getting nothing done.
I thought also you have to get agreement from everyone.
Well, so Amar Lahem Rav Yosef, so let's see the end of the story. So Rav Yosef said to them, La'och sam chasanim, he said to the sons-in-law, Isha klisu shebechayichu mutav v'ilav misalichna l'chu below shivacha v'chulei. He says, I will be happy to give you whatever profit our corporate entity has made through the planting of these trees. You take half, and you can split it among yourselves. But if not, I'll be able to eject you from the company without taking anything. Uvegemar shamamrinu v'lav milsa. So the Gemara explains that Rav Yosef's threat was an empty threat, meaning what? Dekamre misalkinu lahu below shvacha. His threat that he would get rid of them without giving them anything. He says, but in other words, he has to be able to give them the profits of the company, half the profits of the company. Only then can he eject them. That I think there's a typo here, but let's just continue reading it. In other words, they can't they can't take it on their own, the heirs, but we give it to them using a professional valuators, and that's really the point. Now, what is the reason for the cancellation of the partnership? So he explains. He says, "Hatam shabat la hashutvis av shekavu zman b'shut mahar shadam kasav hatam lefi shahar yarshim panim chadash osein." It's because the heirs are new people, and velo imam hisna el im hamorish. And I didn't negotiate with these heirs to be their partners. I only negotiated with the decedent. And another reason that's brought by the Radvaz is shehudin hayorshim sheichol malachzer bahen ve'ein mechuyavim l'kaimes hashutfus atam kivin shamam lo hayam meshubad l'kim hashutfus elabal hamamon u'chavar meis v'nifka shibad hamamon. He says because whatever. In other words, you might argue that the surviving partner might say, well, I want to keep the company running. Your father's assets there's a lien on them from the company. The answer is that there's not, because once the person passes away, the lien that the corporate entity had on his assets is also gone. Now,
I think he's got his house, it's securing loans and stuff like that, then that security is gone.
Yeah, it seems that way. It seems that way. Unless there was an outstanding lien. In other words, if that it seems that, so you're saying like if let's say a corporate entity had guaranteed a certain amount of money. So usually there's assets that the corporate entity has maybe in a separate account. That might be different. Let's say we set up a corporation, and so that money that we put in makes both partners not liable individually, or what is it called, severally? Is that the term?
Yeah, sometimes bank loans are set up where they want personal guarantees and stuff like that, so,
He'll-
I know when we open up a corporate, margin account, we have personal, guarantees in
Really,
case it goes to a negative.
I suppose that is so long as the corporate bank account has not been dissolved, then the liens still hold. But you could dissolve that bank account.
If with all business still,
What?
the personal liability is still there.
Mhm.
It's not always like that though.
No, no, it's not always.
Because I've set up, when I set up our business, they give us lines of credit, everything like that on the business, nothing personal.
I understand that, but as the situation program is not very strong, they want personal guarantees. Yeah, that's not the rule of thumb, but that's.
I mean, you could contract in any way that you want, whatever way, no matter the paperwork that you write up to make that kind of agreement you can put in whatever conditions you want.
A corporation set up to stop personal liability. But sometimes they need money in the corporation, they have to do personal.
Right, I understand. Now, let's say that corporate entity is not dissolved and the company makes profits after the person passes away. Umasha Kosavnu, he says, Harevach la'emsa ken kosav b'nesivas hamishpat hagam shemikar hadin ashutfas batla. He says, yes, it's true. The partnership is automatically dissolved. So then why do they split the profits between the heirs and the surviving partner? Dematzi levato l'salik atzmo b'veistim v'lasok b'chelko levado. Avalim kvar osak b'stam harevach le'emtza rak shenotel schar tirchasa. The only thing that you can argue is that the surviving partner, if he's still running the business on his own, he's entitled to additional compensation. In other words, you wouldn't say that all the profits are divided in half. You would say that he's allowed to be compensated either per hour or per year, an additional amount because he's now running the business by himself. But the heirs are still entitled to a share in the profits. They split half the profits after you deduct his salary from, that he's entitled to for the work. In other words, in other words, what we're essentially saying is, yes, the partnership is dissolved, but only if it's actively dissolved, meaning that either party has a right to say, we're done. In other words, the heirs cannot insist to be taken into the partnership and become now the new partners, replace their father. But so long as the partnership has not been actively dissolved, the company can still operate. And will operate until someone, either the surviving partner or the heirs, basically say, okay, we're done. Just give us our cut. So that's the way
While it
that
continues, we're saying that the surviving partner gets compensated for his efforts.
it's compensated for basically taking over the deceased partner's share of the work. Yeah.
I guess that should all be written up as well in an ideal
Right.
situation in
Right.
advance. I'm looking at Marvin and shaking his head.
Right. And furthermore, let's say there was an agreement that was written up beforehand. He says, "V'kasvu b'achronim v'had darmina debatla hashutfes kol zeh shelo hisnu." When we say that the partnership dissolves, that's only if there was no written agreement in advance. Avalim haya tanai mefurish bein hashutvim. But let's say there was an explicit agreement among the partners. She'im yamus echad mehem lo titbatel hashutves, that if one of them passes away, the partnership will not dissolve adzman shekavu until a certain time. Okay, tanam kayim. So then that's a binding agreement. Okay, ve'ein echad mehem yachol levatel hashutves, and therefore neither party, neither the surviving partner nor the heirs, can dissolve the partnership. Okay, so now up until now, we've been talking about two partners. What if there are three partners and one partner dies? So you have a majority of surviving partners. Could you then not argue that since we have the majority of the corporate entity is alive, then the heirs cannot demand to dissolve the partnership? So he says, on this case, and what if you have a partnership of 10 partners and one partner dies? So then it becomes even more complicated and more compelling to say that the company should not automatically dissolve.
But it not just then become a partnership of 9 or?
And instead of 10,
Two,
yeah.
And the heirs to that 110 should be paid out on a valuation.
That's right.
Yeah, just-
That's right. So he says, but there's still a machlokes here between the Radbaz and the Chacham Tzvi. They hold Sovrim Shabbat lo kol hashutus v'yochel echad min nisharm lomar lo nishtatvati ela im shnayim. So he says, if there's three partners, then according to them, one of the surviving partners can demand to dissolve the company because he can argue, I was only prepared to go into partnership as three people, not as two people. Like, in other words, I think it's too much work, and I'm not prepared to assume that responsibility. So therefore, I demand to dissolve the partnership, and they hold that that's a legal claim. Avalim echad ein ritzonu lihishar shutov. So I don't want to just have a two-person partnership. Or he could argue the guy that died, he was doing the most vital part of the work for the corporation.
Right.
And like you and I are a couple of schmendricks, compared to the guy that died. So we're not going to be able to run the company.
Well, a key man.
The key man. He was the key man. V'chein mashman b'divrei harama shehevi, shlosha shekiblu iska me'echad, umeis echad mehen, nisbat el ha'in v'cholom lachzor behem, v'hevi sheken kasav ha'beis yosef b'shem ha'ritva. And that seems to be the opinion of the Rama as well, because he says that if three people go into business together and one of them dies, then the two surviving partners, either one of them can say, we want to stop this. Ulam hamahar shadam soiver shadavka legabe yorshim badla shutfis hol v'yatza hamamon l'rishusam v'lo imam hisna. However, the mahar shadam says no. Only the heirs can say, we don't want to remain partners. We want out. But if there are two surviving partners, but the two surviving partners have to figure out a way to continue the business. If even one of them wants to continue, because they have the assets of the company. So the Pischei Tshuva brings from a sefer called Avkat Rochel that was written by the Beis Yosef, that the Beis Yosef was asked a shaila from the Arizal, Hashe'ela Yilamdenu Rabbeinu, Shimon Lokach mi Reuven Mana b'Toras Iska. So this is a very historically important shaila. The Arizal asked Rav Yosef Karo the following question in Tzfat. Wow. So you can just imagine the import of this. Yeah, right. So Shimon purchases from Reuven. I'm sorry, no, he doesn't purchase. He accepts $100 from Reuven because Reuven sells Shimon, I want you to go and purchase some merchandise with this $100. V'holicha bayam b'rshus Reuven, and Shimon went ahead, took the cash, got on a boat, and he was going to go to a faraway place, purchase merchandise, bring it back, and then sell it. And that's the way people made profits, right? Vayhi baderech meis Shimon v'hitilu el hayam. So on the way, the boat shipwrecked. Tragically, Shimon died and sunk in the ocean. Ureuven lo nimtza imo sham shetachzur lo Ureuven lo nimtza imo sham shetachzur lo ha'iska. V'yacharei chein tava haschora o nifsada. So what happens is Reuven is not there with him. So shetachzur lo ha'iska. Oh, in other words, what happened was Shimon purchased merchandise and took the merchandise on a boat with the intention of selling it. Shimon dies on the way. What time is Shacharis today?
Same time.
For you guys.
For us at the same time. Vihitiluhu el hayam. So Shimon dies and he's thrown overboard. Reuven's not there with him. He can't retrieve the merchandise. And then the merchandise sinks or is destroyed. Im yigba Reuven chatzi ha'iska apchas miyorshe Shimon hoel umachatzi samilva. So the question now is, Reuven feels that Shimon lost the assets of the company. So when we go into partnership, we assume both the profits and the losses, 50-50. So the shaila was, can Reuven go to the heirs of Shimon and basically say, I'm really sorry, he goes during the Shiva, pays a Shiva visit. I'm really sorry your father passed away, but you realize he was on official business for the company. He lost $1 million worth of merchandise. You guys owe $500,000 to the company.
Or less amount that company's worth.
Well, whatever. However you're going to place the valuation, can you go to the heirs and basically say, your father lost, the company essentially lost $100 or $1 million of whatever it is, and so we're going to have to deduct it from your inheritance, and you'll have to contribute that back to the company, and I'll lose $500,000, you guys will lose $500,000, but we have to pay our creditors that we borrowed the money from in order, or if it was my money and I invested it with Shimon, if I gave Shimon $1 million of my own money and he was my partner to go and invest it or buy merchandise and sell it, so I need to be made whole and just get my $500,000 back. Okay. And that should come out of the estate. So does he have a legal claim? That's really the argument. Okay. That's the shaila that the Arizal asked the Beis Yosef. Oh, Nema, or could we say, Kevin Shahadin hu shemishal shemes hadra lamara and al yorshe Shimon klum. Or could we say that since Shimon, it's determined that Shimon died before the loss of the merchandise. So as the moment Shimon died, you could say that maybe the partnership was dissolved, and therefore the corporate entity reverts to Reuven. And so when the ship sunk, it was all Reuven's loss, and Shimon's estate is not liable.
I'm a fact sheet.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. So can't have it both, it should be the opposite of the other.
Well, we did say that. I mean, originally we thought that it's an automatic dissolution, but really it turns out that until either party steps forward and says, I hereby dissolve, it's not dissolved. And then you can ask the question the other way. What happens if the boat actually only Shimon is thrown overboard? The boat makes it to its destination with the merchandise, and the customers that they had negotiated with end up purchasing it. So what happens then, Marv? So is it now Reuven's profit exclusively, or is it the heirs?
Or I assume share either way. I can't see the Yerushalayim actually will have to owe money, just a valuation. So if that $500,000 loss puts the company into a negative, I can't see, luckily, the Yerushalayim is responsible for that.
Why not? But why not take it look?
Are the inheritors, Yerushalayim, if the father has a debt, are they responsible for the
Sure, it has to come out of, not from their own money, but from the estate. In other words, Shimon leaves a multi-million-dollar estate.
But the Yorshim will not have money out of their pocket to pay.
There's never out of pocket for the Yorshim, but they're inheriting an estate from their father. You have to pay all the debtors. All the creditors.
I just want to make sure that they don't have to have money out of their own pocket.
Right.
Now, is that the same situation where if the key man has major stroke and incapacitated, is that the same as a death?
It's a good question. If he's incapacitated, I guess the assumption is we would assume that would be tantamount to death. but I'd like to see that. That's a very good question. Maybe he'll do
In
it.
shareholders agreements or partnership agreements, you have key man, provisions, which also include key man insurance. The guy becomes dead or dies or incapacitated, there's insurance.
Hmm, right.
I dealt with that, it was an opposite situation. And the other person tried to work with them in the hospital, basically, well, not brain dead, but pretty close to get information from. I was there, trying to.
Right, that's horrible. That's horrible. Yeah.
Awful, disgusting. It was-
I'm so sorry.
It just slowly went to nothing. Went to nothing. The partner lost everything. Of course,
Because he wasn't the key man. Yeah.
No, he was the guy with brains for sure. He was just a order taker.
Yeah. Wow. So that's our question. So what did the Beis Yosef respond? Be'eshiv lo le'inyan hadin. So as far as the straight law, hadavar pashat lo yatsu hayorshim lidei chovas hachelek shehu milva ad sheyagia lidei Ruvain. He says the heirs have not fulfilled their obligation, which is that the money is owed to Ruvain. And so the Yarkachim Tavas Chora Nifsada Goiver Reuven Meyorshe Shimon Demei Chatzi Ha'iska Shuhu Milva. He said, yes, if the ship sinks after Shimon has passed away, the Shimon's estate there's a lien on Shimon's estate for half of the assets of the company. And if those assets were lost, so they're lost to Shimon's estate as much as they're lost to Reuven's estate. And therefore, that loss has to come out of Shimon's estate. So if, let's say, Reuven was the investor and he had put in $1 million, and all of that capital is lost, so Shimon's estate has to cover half of that. So that was the first part. Vimlo tava rakigia el haaretz v'nimkar ascharev ala revach esrim dinar cholkim arevach Reuven v'yorshe Shimon. And conversely, if the merchandise made it to shore and it was sold and the profit was made, he gives the example of 20 dinars, so then that profit is split between Reuven and Shimon's heirs. Shemei achar shekeshemei Shimon lo bitel Reuven esa iska. And the reason is because Reuven has to actively nullify the partnership. Until either side actively nullifies the partnership, harei min hastam yarshe Shimon cholkim lahefsed u'larevach. Then basically Shimon and Reuven split whatever losses and profits. It's similar, he says, to a case where a father dies and he leaves his kids a rented cow. The heirs are allowed to use the rental during the time that it was rented to the father. In other words, we look at the father's business activity as still active. So let's say I lease a car, or let's say Plony leases a car, and then Plony passes away. So does that nullify the lease automatically? In halacha, the kids can continue driving the car. I guess presumably as long as they qualify for the same driving privileges as the father did. V'ayin b'nesivas hamishpat mashakasav is a deloka mashakasav b'beis Yosef acha al mashakasav b'shvushuv al ayin al zeh b'shvus Yaakov kafi shetzim b'beis Cheshuv ayin sham. And obviously, there's more to discuss here, but it seems that was very interesting tshuva. It basically says that the partnership is still in play until either party, the surviving partner or the heirs, actively nullify it. And that was the reason that we said that if the business continues after Shimon dies and there's either profit or loss, that has to be split. Okay? So does that make sense so far? So you're not siding with.
Yes, I'm wrong.
We won't tell you like that.
We won't tell your clients that you're wrong.
But I guess it would be interesting to note There probably is a clause anytime partnership contracts are drawn up that what happens in cases of incapacity or death.
It's right in there. Yeah, it might even be in the Partnership Act also. Well, yeah, it's dealt with for sure.
All right, we'll hold it here for today, guys. Have a wonderful day. And I have